Hi, good afternoon folks. Can you hear me properly? Oh, there are lots of people out here. Please come forward. Don't stand around there. I hope you guys had a good lunch. It was fantastic, I hope. And so far you're having a good day out there. So without further delay, let me start with that software defined infrastructure, what is all about. Can we get the slide here? Yeah. So I'm sure everybody's mind that what is software defined infrastructure and why do we need to talk about that? What is the bringing or why we are getting all this attention all of a sudden in the software defined infrastructure? Knowingly that Sun came up with that lingo that networking is the computer will be defining the network part of that. And after a decade or so, we are talking about that how the software defined infrastructure itself has played a role. In our world, what we think from the Citrix point of view that the application which is kind of a nucleus of the change as application is migrating from enterprise or iron age to the cloud age. When you talk about the cloud age, that new paradigm shift has come in that application part of that which we call cloud scale. When we talk about the cloud scale, it's not just about that application how it's going to scale or how it's going to elasticity part of that, but it also has to be do with the how the infrastructure is going to play a role in that. When we talk about the infrastructure, we are talking about that not just your day-to-day management or patching here and there or bringing system up and down. It's all about that how the complete life cycle of an application will get managed in the automation formats of that. When we talk about the cloud, we also have to remember that it's no longer a business of manual driven or having a few folks which is managing that. It has to be completely paradigm shift where everything runs in automated fashion. When we talk about that automation, we also have to think through thinking that okay, how do we bring this automation along with not only the application but the infrastructure part of it also. Let's look at the second part of that. When we think about that application, the application which has two parts of it. One is that how the application itself is composed with various modules and how the modules itself are interacting to each other, and then how these modules once they get deployed, how they communicate and how they get monitored. So in a very naive simple applications, you'll have a few processes running. Those processes will get monitored. If any one of them goes down, somebody gets an alert and then fixes that. Or if you have to migrate an application saying that here there is an upgrade going to happen, you just do some kind of a maintenance window and then bring it down and bring it up. That's kind of a legacy we have been living with that. Now this also requires another paradigm thinking about that, how the resources itself will get consumed by the application. We have a set of resources which are dedicated for application, not only from the compute or the storage part of it also has to do that with the networking part of that. If you have a very chatty application like in WhatsApp kind of thing in the legacy part of it requires heavy bandwidth to do the consumption and communicate with the users or the other providers out there. Now the way we see the paradigm which is going to take place in this part of it, one is that the architecture of the application. When we talk about this automation, that legacy part of this automation or the legacy way of developing application is no longer applicable in the cloud era. The second part of that when we talk about this is the infrastructure part of that. When we talk about the infrastructure, there is no longer the dedication of the application, dedication of the server or the network or the storage for applications. You have a complete fabric which has a complete automated suite for the various infrastructure we are looking for, starting from your networking, L2, L3, firewall applications like ADC services. When you talk ADC is like application development content part of that, L4 to L7 services. Then we got into that storage part of that where you may have a distributed or the dedicated either it could be distributed or it could be like some kind of a relational database which if your application is still consuming that part of it. So we'll look into that details part of that. Let me go one more top and discuss about that how the application itself is in transitioning. If you understand the application which has been built in, it has a various components, each component has a various interfaces and those interfaces connected to each other by communicating with some fashion. Either it could be IPC or it could be some kind of REST interface. It could be within the single server or it could be having some kind of multiple server distributed across within a single data center, or it could be across the data center if the application itself is big. Now if you take this application and migrate to the cloud, what we are looking into that there is a new paradigm shift has come up. There is no longer the idea of having a dedicated pool of resources for a particular module. There is no longer the era of having some module which is going to run like that. Like let's take a very concrete example. If you have a security in your module as a part of your application, that security itself cannot be just instantiated as a microservices in that era of the product. Now when you talk about the microservices, what it means that your security, which can be a one module, get decomposed into multiple microservices, and those microservices are running in multiple instances of that. When you talk about these multiple instances, it also has to have that, it has to have good solid infrastructure in place on that. In other words, there are lots of articles which you can go through about the microservices and how the infrastructure makes it enable, but the key takeaway from here is that unless until your application has been architected in a proper fashion, and unless until that you have a supporting infrastructure, you can't have together this. In other words, we can say that when you have an application which has been architected in the microservices form, then you definitely need an infrastructure which is completely automated in the software defined form of that. When you talk about the software defined form, we are looking for that how the infrastructure can be abstracted out, which can be captured in the form of software, and that applications or the principle of the software can be applied on the infrastructure. That's the second part of that. And without getting more on the microservices part of that, I would like to just to give you some view about how the microservices itself get managed, or the life cycle of this in the operational world. Assume in a very simplistic world, you have a few services which are talking to each other, and there are certain contract or services exposed, like A is talking to B and A and B has certain contract, and that's how they will communicate. Now in the microservices world, what happened, there is a very fundamental part of the piece comes is the resilience. Means if B goes down or if A goes down, we don't have a luxury saying that, oh, service is down and we'll come back. Nowadays we are living in the era where any time that application goes down, it becomes a national or international news. Oh, that Gmail was down. So when we have this kind of a component part of that, what happens is that application developer who are developing an application no longer have a luxury to be detached from the infrastructure. At the same time, when we have an operational guy who are managing and building that application are no longer detached from the application behavior itself. That means the way we look into that is that we have a paradigm shift in the data center part of it, which talks about the DevOps culture. When you talk about the DevOps culture, it's no longer that developer, test, and the operational is a complete three separate bullet. It's like becomes one single molecule in the application lifecycle part of it. I just wanted to give you highlights of that. When you have this kind of a strategic thinking going on, that's where you get the complete automation in that. My whole take was that to give you some kind of a briefing and talk about that how the microservices will evolve and how the infrastructure will get evolved in order to make it that success for our customer or for your customer as well. Looking into that, we as a Citrix, what we have thought through about that, how the software infrastructure itself. Oh, this is. Can we move to the next slide? Okay. So basically, if you look at this infrastructure stack, how it has been laid it out, this is just a pure one view of it. I am not saying that this is a very generic view where it will applicable for all of them, but in a very naive or a simplistic term, if you look into that, we have a very basic fundamentals where like how the request itself comes in. There is some networking involved in that, which is kind of a router and switches form. Then there is some application services involved for from the networking point of view, which we call like L4 to L7 services. And once the services comes, then we have a set of servers which are providing the services to the applications. Either it could be form of the web server, it could be form of the app server, it could be form of the database servers. Now each server, whenever there is a more than one, you need some kind of a load balancer part of it also. Now in the infrastructure defined, what happens that these kind of details get captured in the form of a definition. Now when we call about the definition, it is nothing but a abstraction of your environment in the form of a software. Now it could be JSON, YAML, XML, whatever. But the intent out here is that you have an infrastructure which gets abstracted out, and that can be consumed by any application developer. I have a web app, I need certain resources. One of the requirement is that I need a firewall policy where I can block certain services. I need load balancer and I need some kind of persistence. That kind of a very much simplistic defined infrastructure can be captured. Today, these kind of a definition get consumed by various orchestrator, and that's why we have an application orchestrator. When we talk about the application orchestrator, it's not about the Puppet, Chef. There are like various forms of that, Puppet, Chef, Kubernetes, Docker containers, Docker Swarm. There are many of them. But the intent out here is that when you have an application, you define the definition of the infrastructure, and along with that application definition, the orchestrator consumes and communicates with the various forms of the infrastructure. And that's how the complete application itself gets deployed. I can give you another analogy of the software defined networking. Anybody from the networking background? Oh, okay. So then in networking world, SDN has become very, one of the biggest trendsetter in the data center. We have been to many customer meeting and we have seen that there are many SDN controller where they have come and play a role there. Any network elements which has to be configured or programmed, it has to done with their controller, or it could be automated, or it could be some third-party solution out there. Same thing applies in this form of that, where if you have infrastructure, it has to be abstracted, which the orchestrator can consume and configure all the elements for your application, not only from the resources point of view, but it includes networking and the storage point of view as well. Going back to the Citrix environment, where what we have been doing is that traditionally we are in the load balancer. I am from the networking business unit of the Citrix. We are part of the NetScaler team. Traditionally, NetScaler has been doing that when the traffic comes to any data center, it comes from the router part of it, then it comes to the DMZ zone where there are a bunch of firewalls. Before it hits to firewall, it load balances. And once the traffic comes out from the firewall, it again load balances to various silos of the application servers. Or it could be your part of the division like HR, finance, or whatnot. Now this is what we call it north-south traffic, where the traffic is coming in and then getting load balanced, and we provide multiple services like L4 to L7. We have a complete stack of the services. Now in the cloud era, what we are trying to see is that this north-south traffic is also shifting from the east-west traffic. When we talk about the east-west traffic, there are a set of services which are going to come in the container, and each set of services will be communicating to each other. There are principle applies how the services should communicate and what should be go through and all that. But the key factor out here, as a Citrix, we have innovated and we have developed a microservices form factor of NetScaler, which runs within the container environment, where if you have a service A which is communicating to B, and if there are multiple instances of that, it will load balance. So it's an analogy of minions. Those who are familiar with the Despicable movies, it's like minions which are running, but they do only one part of it. Same way, Citrix CPX, which does one service, but that's all it does. You have multiple ones of that, then it will run. But the thing which becomes very critical out here is that when you have this kind of a services running in the cloud environment, then you need multiple of them. It's not like 2, 20, or 30. It becomes like in thousands. We have been talking to the customers, and the number sometimes blows away the kind of scalability we need in our environment. For that, what we have come up is that we have come up with a new management solution, what we call NetScaler MAS. That management solution is like management and analytics system. It not only provides the complete orchestration support for our CPXs, but also gives the complete life cycle for the applications and how the application itself get deployed, configured, and monitored. So with that, I would like to give you an opportunity to come, please stop by in our booth, where we are talking and demoing this kind of technologies, and we can answer any of your questions. We also have as a Citrix, I just talked about the networking and the software-defined infrastructure and so on and so forth. But as a bigger part of Citrix, we also have a virtualization, and that will be also get demoed in our booth tomorrow. So if you have some interest, please stop by and talk to us. Thank you very much. Any questions?